I love this quote where first time entrepreneurs obsessed over product, second time entrepreneurs obsessed over distribution. That could not have been more true for me. Now I'm just obsessed with distribution, and product is important, but at the end of the day, like it's not a if you build it, they will come type thing that very rarely happens. Now it's something where that's critical. But in the moment, like how do I think about that? It's really just being super introspective, isolating what I think went wrong, and then being sure for the next one to not make those same mistakes again.
Welcome to Forward Obsessed, where we talk to breakthrough business leaders and rising entrepreneurs about their journeys, origin stories, and aha moments.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Forward Obsessed. I'm your host, Pete Senna, joined by
David Salinas.
And we're back in the building. We got Mike Lloyd on the pod today. What's up, man?
Hey, good to see you guys.
Welcome. Welcome to New Haven.
It's good to be here.
You've been here before?
I have been here before. One of my good friends went to Yale and we came down to visit once and enjoyed the pizza and in this amazing building. I see all the pizza on the walls and the art, and it's been great.
That's an anomaly. We just had this pizza art show called the New Haven Pizza Club, where this artist, Michael Pollack, who's a friend of mine, decided to do pop art around the pizza because he grew up in New Haven and he thought it was like the most ultimate connective thing for people. Mm-hmm. It turned out to be true. He's been massively successful off of the art show that we had and we hosted here. It's so funny that pizza truly is like so connecting, and Connecticut really has taken a hold of it by calling themselves the pizza capital of the world.
And for everybody who is listening and can't see us, we're of course, on location here at District in New Haven here. This is why you can't see it. So if you're not tuned into the video version of it, definitely get on that because got to convert you all to watch this. So Mike, good to be here today with you. Got a couple of questions. Like, how do you go from like selling burned CDs to launching companies that you sell for hundreds of millions of dollars? Like, I got to start from the beginning. So like, where did the seeds of like hacker entrepreneur come from? Like, where were you born? How'd you grow up? I want to hear all the good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in a small town in Michigan, right outside of Ann Arbor, go blue. And I had an aunt, my dad's sister, who was an early employee at Cisco Systems. So she lived out in California and was essentially on the sales team. I don't know exactly what number, but early on. And she was really building her career and having great successes in the early 90s as a Cisco Systems salesperson. And I remember going out to visit her, and she always lived in the nicest houses I've ever been in, and these types of moments. And one time I went out, and I was in middle school, and my cousin, who was probably 18 at the time, introduced me to this thing called an MP3. And so back then, it was definitely not something that was popular and people knew about. It was very much like a Silicon Valley hidden thing. And so he showed me what a CD burner was, as well as basically how to download an MP3 on the internet. And this is the AOL days type era.
I had a few listservs myself. I hear you.
So it was really great. And one of the fortunate things, my dad always put a computer in front of me as a young kid. So when I was 5 or 6, I was messing around with computers and really just took a liking to them. And so here I am in middle school learning about this thing called an MP3 and a CD burner, and I was just fascinated by it. So I went back to this, again, small town that I grew up in Michigan, and nobody had a CD burner and nobody knew what an MP3 was. And I started to share that story a little bit with friends, and they would basically ask me to make them CDs. So I went and bought, this is when it took an hour to burn a CD. I went and bought a burner and installed it in my dad's work computer and doing all this kind of stuff, and started to basically make CDs for myself. And friends would basically give me lists of songs that they wanted. And it was amazing because it was a way for me to grow my music collection, because they would put songs on their list that I didn't know, and I would get them and like them. And so it was a really cool way to share this new technology with friends. And, they would give me some money here and there, but it was never a big enterprise in that regard. But it was something where I really learned how to bring a new technology into a world where it didn't exist. And so much to the point, so much so where I started to buy spindles of CDs, and I got a satellite dish because we were in the middle of nowhere. So you had to do 56K modem type speeds. So downloading took a long time. So I got a satellite dish to download songs faster, and was really trying to think through the economies of scale before I even knew what that term meant. And it was really fun, and I really enjoyed it. And so really, I feel like since then in my life, I've been trying to scratch that itch of building something from nothing and providing value and having it be a win-win. I do feel like business at the end of the day is a win-win when it's done well and right. It moves the world forward. People are happy, get what they want, value exchange, et cetera, et cetera. So I've been chasing that high, I guess, ever since.
I love that.
So the statute of limitations is now gone.
I hope so.
On this illegal activity. At what point did you realize that what you were doing was highly illegal? Did you know right away, or did it take a little while to kind of pick it up?
No, it took a little while. I mean, as a kid, I was like 12, 13 years old. I mean, I don't know how refined my understanding of the legal system was. And to me, there was this robust, world on the internet that was doing this. And then obviously over the next handful of years, or not even handful, it didn't take very long, CD burners started becoming as stock in every computer. So everyone had them. And then Napster and all those things started to really take off and become popular. And so, it's not even really a business. It was more just like this little hobby side thing. But
it's okay.
Yeah.
Statute of limitations. They can't come back and sue you. It's over.
I do want to touch
on
that,
Sony?
I do want to touch on that though, Mike, because I think that there's a little bit of foreshadowing there, right? And by foreshadowing, what I mean is you looked at this idea of limiting factors, which was literally the loading bar on your screen because you had 56K and you go and you get the satellite dish, right? Yeah. You looked at this opportunity from a market perspective where nobody in your hometown had these burners, nobody had the ability to do that, but everybody had the need, right? So supply low, demand high. Mm-hmm. You're going to talk a lot about that in some of your later ventures. So I don't want to forget that because I do think that there's some things that kind of all connect the dots from that perspective. But so you go on, so you've got this little side hustle. You end up go the traditional university route, college route?
I did. Yeah. So, went from Michigan. I was actually going to go to the University of Michigan. And soccer was my sport. I enjoyed playing it. And, I was fortunate enough to be sort of offered a spot on the University of Michigan team, but no scholarship. And basically that was code for you can be a practice player was essentially what it was. And so I was probably not going to do that. But, what ended up happening was late in my senior year, I'd committed to go to Michigan, had that spot, but I wasn't sure I was actually going to play on the soccer team. But late in my senior year of high school, I went to a soccer tournament down in Virginia, and a coach walked up to me after the tournament and said, we would love for you to come check out our campus. And of course I was like, well, what school are you from? And he said, Virginia Military Institute. Never heard of that school. Knew nothing about it. Went home and started to research it. And I was like, this is different and interesting. And so probably a week later, I was on a plane down to Virginia and walking around this campus that it's a military college. I mean, everyone wears uniforms, shaved, ready to go. It's a lot of rules. And honestly, there was this experience I had on they call it post, but campus, where it's like, this is different and I'll either love it or hate it. And if I hate it, I can always transfer to a school like University of Michigan. I don't necessarily have to stick it out if it's awful. And a lot of people, frankly, do leave that school. The attrition rate is like 50% of people that actually finish. And I sort of like that because, it was hard. And everybody that I talked to there said, because mostly I was talking to upperclassmen who were getting towards the end, and they said, it's worth it. It's hard, but it's worth it. So that resonated, and I ended up switching and going down to Virginia to the Virginia Military Institute.
Now, what would you study in school?
Mechanical engineering.
Mechanical engineering. So how did you find your way to entrepreneurship and getting into the insurance world? That's a hell of a divergence on the path.
Yeah. So I always knew I wanted to be a businessman. I didn't really know exactly how to get there and what that really meant. But in my sort of like long-term vision, I always saw that. And so, I was lucky to get some advice from, especially that aunt that I mentioned earlier, who's at Cisco and some of her sort of friends and colleagues who were sort of living the life that I wanted to live. Professionally. And they said, you'll probably get an MBA someday if you want to do this. And so studying engineering is a great way to sort of learn problem solving, and it's a diverse sort of knowledge base that you can build. So you don't just go business. And mechanical engineering also just sort of came easy to me. Frankly, it just sort of fits the way my mind works. And so it was a pretty sort of obvious choice from my perspective at the time.
Say more about that, because we've had a lot of guests that have been sat in that chair that you're in right now that have mechanical engineering backgrounds and that have gone on to build all types of different companies. What is it about engineering that makes you learn how to be a problem solver? And when you said that's kind of how my mind works, can you just elaborate on that for us a little bit?
Sure. So I view engineering as really just problem solving, and it's really how do you understand the rules of the world, i.e. physics, to sort of model things and then solve whatever the problem is. And obviously, as you're building your engineering skill set, you're just learning equations that describe how the world works and how you can use them to solve problems. And so that was always something where I just drawn to it, the math and sciences and problem solving side of life. So that was probably a big reason.
So did you immediately go into entrepreneurship out of college? Did you take jobs, or what was the path from college?
So at VMI, there was a professor who took a liking to my skill set and story, and he offered for me to be an intern for him. So in the summers, he would go up to Connecticut. Actually, I lived in Windsor Locks for the summer, and he would offer an internship to some students that would basically help him do computational fluid dynamics, which is a subset of essentially mechanical engineering, and a way to model things. And he, during that internship, said, so he went to MIT for his PhD. And during that internship, he said, you're one of the first students I've met that I think could actually get in and thrive at MIT. If you're interested in exploring that, I'd be happy to talk through it. And that was just completely unimaginable to me. My parents didn't go to college, grew up in this small town where I didn't know anybody who actually went to that school. It was more something you just sort of hear about and like in the media and randomly, rather than something that's actually tangible and you can potentially touch.
It's the Hollywood of engineering, isn't it?
Yeah.
MIT,
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of a joke, like to a certain extent. And what I mean by a joke is people talk about it without like real actual context. It's just this reference for something that's far away. And so when he said that, and obviously as an alum, I took him seriously. I said, okay, well, maybe I should entertain this and think about it. And so I worked really closely with him throughout the rest of my college experience, and did basically everything that he said I needed to do, including some pretty cool research, and got great grades from then on out, and was able to get in. So that was what basically took me from Virginia and mechanical engineering up to Boston and MIT. And then while I was at MIT, although I was studying essentially mechanical engineering, it was a little bit of a hybrid program. But while I was there, I became more obsessed with the tech startups that were happening in sort of Cambridge and MIT and Harvard, rather than the actual equations and mechanical engineering I was doing.
What was it that drew you in?
To tech startups?
Yeah, to startups,
oh my
tech
gosh.
startups.
I think it's just such an amazing way to make an impact on the world. Mm-hmm. And, it's something where you can create something out of nothing. And mm-hmm. thankfully we live in a country that rewards that. And it's a meritocracy in so many ways. And to me, I felt like I was able to get to the places, the college and MIT, because I just worked really hard and tried to, basically get after it. Mm-hmm. And entrepreneurship is exactly that type of a career where if you work really hard and get after it and pick the right thing and a little bit of luck, it can be life-changing. Mm-hmm. And so when I think back to the little experience I had with the burn CDs, like all the way through, it was just common thread and sort of an obvious choice for my skill set.
For me, it's always been, so there's like an energy and a romanticism around that startup world, the tech startups, that just is very, very palpable. I mean, we've seen it over the last 20 years. We've seen it. That just, if you have an itch, if you have that entrepreneurial bug at all, it's going to hook you and draw you in.
Right.
And then when you start to realize the games that are played and the way that money is raised and all of that stuff, I feel like that's the thing that just create, at least for us, it creates a lot of intrigue.
I love that you mentioned MIT and just like how that was something that was like almost on the young man's bucket list of yours that you ended up being able to check off the box. You have kids, right?
I do.
So how old are your kids?
They're 8, 7, and 5.
Awesome. So how do you inspire work ethic? You've used the term hard work a couple times already in the pod, and I don't think anybody who's sat in that chair or achieved a fraction of your success can do it without hard work. How are you going to instill hard work in your kids, and what do you recommend doing? Because I think that there's a lot of talk about, will colleges even be around in 20 years from now? And there's a lot of sort of back and forth. Like, what's your hot take on that?
So I've seen people that are maybe more naturally lazy work really hard when they find something that excites them. And so I think part of it is trying to help my children find things that excite them and get them motivated to work hard. When I was younger, more like 10 years old or so, picked up the piano. And it was something where someone taught me the basics of how to build chords and sort of read music. And over like 4 days, I just like taught myself to play a bunch of mainstream stuff. I wasn't good, but I could actually like turn this big wooden box into something that's recognizable. And
still play?
I mean, here and there, not really, but I could sit down and play the Titanic theme song if you wanted me to. And so that was sort of the era we're talking about. And in any case, it was something where like that, for some reason, in that moment, captured my attention. I just threw myself at it and worked really hard to accomplish whatever goal I had, just like make this thing sound okay. But I've seen this a little bit with my kids in certain moments, right? If they get really into a puzzle or into whatever it is that they're trying to solve, they become obsessed, to come back to one of your favorite words here on the pod, and really just like lean into it. And when you become obsessed and about something, the hard work just is fun. It's not work. And I hope that I can help my kids find things that get them excited, and then they can see the fruits of their hard work, on the other side of whatever that is.
So you're back. So let's take you back. You're at MIT. Yeah. You're swimming in the tech startup pool. Did you go right for your own startup? What happens next? So while I was there, I knew that in the moment I wasn't remotely prepared to be an actual founder and start a company. I didn't know what an income statement was. I was very, very uneducated when it came to some of the foundational blocks of building a business. And so I went and joined two tech startups. Well, I joined, in serial order. I joined one company as probably the 130th employee. It was a big data marketing company in Boston. And then I worked there for about a year and a half. And then I joined another company earlier stage. It's probably the 20th employee of that one, both in sort of project management type roles. But they were venture-backed businesses, and, we're in Boston, and there were other people that I could learn from and sort of watch how the founders, acted and did things. And all of this was sort of in line for this a mission I talked about earlier, which was to get an MBA. In my head, it was sort of, MIT was sort of a stop on the way to a certain extent of ultimately getting an MBA and being an entrepreneur. And so I worked at those two companies and essentially took the GMATs and got ready to apply to MBA programs. And I did that. I was lucky enough to get into Harvard Business School. Nice.
I've heard of that place before.
Let's talk about the two schools that you went to, because the first one I've never heard of. The next two, meaning Virginia Military Institute, I've never heard of. Even after you've said it, I'm like, where is that? Mm-hmm. But MIT and Harvard, I just want to touch on those two schools, because obviously both of them are sort of, as you mentioned, sort of whimsical. Like being a kid from Michigan, from a small town, you don't think about Harvard, right. You don't think about MIT. Just for the audience, and what is the importance of those schools? Because I know what it is because we're in the town of Yale, but like for you and for the people that are thinking about, like my daughter will throw out, like, I'm just going to apply to Ivy League schools. Like, why go to those schools?
So when I think about, I guess any school or university, I tend to think about the three sort of things you can get from them. One is obviously an education, what you learn. Two would be prestige. So just by associating with whatever their brand is, what does it do for you? And then third would be the network, whether it be just friends or just ability to call on people. And so for both Harvard and MIT, I feel like those two schools in particular, for someone like me who grew up the way that I did, it was life-changing and game-changing because it opened doors that otherwise would be harder to open. And do I think it was absolute necessity to go to a school like that? Absolutely not. You know, I think that a lot of times those schools pick people who just have an incredible drive to win and will win regardless, somehow, some way. But sometimes it's a little harder if you don't have some of the prestige and potentially network that come with those schools to help. And so for me, it was really, really life-changing. I think you tend to learn a lot of the same stuff at many schools. It's just more those other two, the prestige and network, that really help out and change things. And so it was a bit validating to me too. I feel like it sort of upped my expectations of myself, which can come both ways, I suppose. You know, if you fall short. But I've been fortunate to have had some failures and some successes along the way. But I do think that if you're able to get into those types of schools, the doors that open and are just easier to open are pretty powerful.
I've always heard the network. I've never heard anybody position it as the way that you did in terms of who gets into those schools. So thank you for that. So now you go to Harvard. What happens there? Do you go into startups while you're doing your MBA, or did you wait until you finished it? Like, how did you balance the two?
So I knew, and it was frankly part of my application, that I was going to be an entrepreneur on the other side. And I actually think in some senses that wasn't necessarily the right move, because I didn't really even entertain any of the other cool opportunities that come to campus. I mean, there's so many different companies and different types of jobs that you could potentially go into out of a program like HBS. And I didn't pay attention in the slightest. I didn't go to any of those career days or, any of it. I just knew that I wanted to be a venture-backed founder on the other side of it. So in between my first and second year of this 2-year program, I started a little business, and it was the first of a string of failures. It was essentially an online reference checking company. So, you basically send an email to someone, they put their references in, very much like a Typeformy type survey goes out. They fill it out. We sort of pull all the information together and serve it back to the company that wants the references done. So we built that business over the course of the summer, and it was interesting, and we generated a little bit of revenue, but it certainly wasn't enough to not go back for the second year. And then at the same time, I did apply to help this venture firm called FJ Labs. It's run by a guy named Fabrice Grinda and Jose Marin. And they were online marketplace investors. I shouldn't say were, they still are. In fact, they're amazing at it. So they are former entrepreneurs turned investors, and they basically do company building and incubation alongside of it. So they had this amazing program where you essentially help them with their deal flow and diligence of the investing opportunities that they have. You learn how they think. They learn how you think. You learn a lot from talking to all these companies. And if they like you and you like them, they will actually seed you to build a business. And you basically jump into their incubation program and do that. So that's essentially what I did during my second year of business school. So I built this little reference checking company, didn't really go anywhere.
Bootstrapped or?
Yeah, totally bootstrapped. It's called Higher Probability. Love the name.
Cool name. Yeah.
it was unfortunately, I let go of the domain.
I was going to say, it's a great domain.
It's a great domain. I should have kept it, but I let it go, and now I think somebody else owns it. But in any case,
you can buy it back for $100,000.
Yeah, I know exactly.
Or just pull Dharmesh and start buying flipping domains to Sam Altman. Did you see that?
I did not see that.
He bought chat.com, and then Sam Altman and OpenAI bought chat.com from him. But it's, it was a multi-million-dollar acquisition and then a multi-million-dollar flip. So it's just kind of funny. Just bad joke on it.
Well, it's funny because if you think about, in my mind, I think References is sort of an insurance company, right? You need it because you're trying to make sure that the hire that you're making is the right hire. It's like
it's DD. It's DD at the human level.
Yeah. It's sort of it's the only thing you can do is sort of like an insurance policy is to check those references, and a lot of people don't do it. So to outsource it is a smart idea. I can imagine how hard it is to execute, but yeah. Interesting.
That's interesting. I haven't thought of it that way.
Yeah.
I guess I've been doing insurance forever.
So that, in my mind, I was like, oh, it's funny that you would do that.
I've never put that together. It's interesting.
So at FJ Labs, you were basically an entrepreneur in residence. It's kind of like the role, right?
You start as a junior member on the deal team, right? And then eventually you turn into an EIR, which is exactly what I did.
I love that. And that's a role that I've never had. I know I'm sure a lot of people are listening going, well, what would that entail? If you had to give me that 3-month, 6 month sort of stint in like 3 minutes, what would you tell me or the audience is the most important things that you learn about good deals, bad deals? And I'm purposely putting you on the spot for the quickness there.
You're talking about
what you learned in those deal rooms. Yeah.
In the deal rooms. Yeah. I mean, they were so organized. And when I mean they, I mean FJ Labs and the way that they built their funnel and evaluation process. They were so structured on the different components of the business that need to be working in tandem to be successful. So they were online marketplace investors. So, two-sided marketplaces, sometimes 3, sometimes some services, but essentially two-sided marketplace. And to do those well, you have to really think about how do you get supply? How do you get demand? How do you get liquidity on both sides? How do you make sure that one side isn't more powerful than the other and create incentives? And so we would step through in all the conversations, very specific questions. What is your GMV run rate? What is your take rate? Because you can prop things up by having a really low take rate that's unsustainable. Like, what are unit economics, customer acquisition costs on both sides of the marketplace? Because so many people just talk about the things that are going well, and so you can tell very quickly when you're super structured like that if the founder and entrepreneur knows how to build and think about that type of business, because it's very different than a lot of others. Because you basically have to build both sides at the same time. And so back to your question, what did it teach me? It was just a very sort of organized, structured approach to building a business. You can't just focus on one little part that you may think is interesting and the most fun. You sort of have to keep it all balanced. And I'd love to say that I took all of that to heart with the first business, the business that I built with them. I underestimated one part of that business, which we'll get to in a minute, I'm sure. But it was really great crash course to see what took the business over the bar for them to actually invest. So you sort of knew where you had to be and what you had to do to make it a venture-backed, early stage business. So it was great training ground.
You just don't get that type of exposure to those types of opportunities often. So that's amazing that you were able to do that. So then did you go, I'm assuming based off of that, you started a company right out of there?
Yeah, I did.
What kind of company was it?
It was an insurance company. Surprise. Yeah. So one of the things that they were doing at the time, and I'm sure they're still doing, is essentially when you think about the online marketplaces that exist in the world, Craigslist being sort of one of the original online ones, people started to build vertical versions of that. So there's this really cool map where you look at the homepage of Craigslist and you can see companies that basically have built vertically integrated marketplaces off of each of those blue hyperlinks. So Airbnb, housing, right? It's just this huge $80 billion company is one of those hyperlinks on Craigslist. And they just do a better job of again, matching supply and demand for each of those categories.
The riches are in the niches, right?
That's right. And so we would do a very top-down approach because at the time I didn't have passion around some specific idea and I wasn't coming into it with, hey, I want to build this type of business. It was more, I just want to be an entrepreneur and let's find a business to build. So we were looking at a lot of the different categories, and one of the interesting things is insurance is not a category on Craigslist. You can't go on there and buy it. But when I was thinking about how big a lot of those different markets are, insurance just popped into my head. And I remember going onto Google and typing insurance in and starting to learn more about just how big the actual market is and thinking through it in terms of how important of a product it is, but that nobody actually likes to think about and wants to think about. And I've learned a lot since I've entered the space, but at the moment it was a big market, a lot of money changing hands, and generally speaking, really bad technology. And as a technologist and somebody that knew how to build, I felt that I could do some damage in that industry. And that's why I leaned in.
And you leaned in, I mean, obviously everyone's talking about insurtech now, but back then there was no insurtech. It was like, we're going to try to apply some technology to this really nascent field that was, still to this day, in some cases, a little bit in the Stone Ages, right?
Yeah.
But that venture ultimately didn't work out.
That's right.
So is that your first like official punch in the face as an entrepreneur?
That was my first very public punch in the face. You know, even though higher probability that small little business, I mean, it was never really serious. Yeah, but it was a summer internship, you know, so we weren't hiring and paying and doing a bunch of credit card stuff. I mean, there's a little bit of that, but nothing too serious.
But also your own money.
This was
right. You weren't raising capital from somebody else.
Exactly.
A lot more reputational.
This one you raised money for?
It was just from FJ Labs because remember I was an EIR with them, and so we built the company together, and we absolutely hired some people and raised capital from them, and it was ultimately not successful, and I'm happy to talk about the reasons why, but it was something where
how did it make you feel? Because you're a hard worker, you're a person who keeps breaking into new things. So what did that L on the scoreboard look like for you?
It was devastating. It was awful. I mean,
talk about it. Take us there.
Yeah, it was, I'll never, ever forget when I had to stand in front of the team, and it was about a 7-8 person team. So it wasn't a large team, but basically telling them we were shutting the business down. And I'll never forget that moment. And it's something where ever since then, you're always trying to build responsibly. So you never have to go through that again, because at the end of the day, you know, people are always like, oh, business is business, but so much of it is human, right? And these are people that have worked alongside you and you tried to like jump in and believe the story and where you're going. And then to say, hey, this didn't work out for whatever reason, it was awful. And as that really was my first really sort of public big L, to use your term, and because of that, it was something where you like can't really hide from it, you know, to a certain extent. So you have to just like fully bear it.
This is a little pre-social, and nowadays it's like maybe on Twitter the next day, but back then it was a little quiet online, right?
I mean, I'll never forget there was this what I would call like sassy insurance media outlet that would like to take sort of like jabs at all the people trying to build new companies, and one of the like week or two later, this media outlet basically took a screenshot of the website that was now like, if you went to the URL, it was blank, and I turned it off pretty quickly, and it was some just sort of like too bad.
Another one bites the dust kind of thing.
Yeah, it was like that kind of a thing. And I get why they do that, right? It's sort of, I think, because they were trying to go after more of the established, you know, players to sponsor them. But it was something where, you know, I'm just such a fan of entrepreneurship. And, you know, even though that one was painful because it was mine, like anytime anyone has to shut a business down, it's sad to me, because I know that there are human lives that are affected, and there was seemingly a decent idea that could have made the world better that didn't come to be.
So you said it was, sorry, David, you said it was devastating.
Yeah.
To you as a person. Mm-hmm. A lot of people have a moment like that happen and they stop. And for the rest of their lives, they talk about what woulda, coulda, shoulda happened, right?
Yeah.
You kept going. And obviously many of us know that this story turned out pretty good for you in the end, right? But what was it that you had to do? What would you say to your younger self, or someone who's thinking about going through this moment right now? How do you bounce back and keep going? Like, what's that look like? What would you say to your kid if they had that moment happen so that they didn't let that break them?
It's a great question. In my mind, when I think about what happened with that business and why it failed, it really came down to distribution. And I frankly just picked a business that is really, really hard to sell the product. And it could have worked maybe if we raised an astronomical amount of money and tried to compete with the Geicos and State Farms and all of those big brands that just plow billions of dollars into advertising every year. But that wasn't, it's really, really hard for a small no-name company to compete with those brands. And so, you know, from my perspective, I went through a lot of introspection on the sort of tail end of that process as part of the decision to shut the company down. And then obviously on the other side of it, on what went wrong. And it kept coming back to distribution. I just didn't respect how hard it is to distribute insurance and sell insurance. And so in the moment, I really liked insurance. I thought it was like, I was right with the fact that it's a big industry with bad technology and people don't like thinking about it. There's a lot that I got right, but I got a really important thing wrong. And I love this quote where first time entrepreneurs obsessed over product, second time entrepreneurs obsessed over distribution. That could not have been more true for me. I was just, and ever since then, I'm just obsessed with distribution, and product is important, but at the end of the day, like it's not a, if you build it, they will come type thing. That very rarely happens. And so now it's something where that's critical, but in the moment, like, how do I think about that? It's really just being super introspective, isolating what I think went wrong, and then being sure for the next one to not make those same mistakes again.
So what I'm hearing is I am not the failure. The thing that I did is the failure, and therefore I should keep going.
Yes.
So I just want to explore for a second the idea of the unwind, right? Because what I've seen a lot is entrepreneurs' unwillingness to fail. Mm-hmm. Right? Like they just don't give up. I've seen people run out of money. I've seen the VCs say the faucet is off, and they'll let go of 99% of everybody, but they hold on to one person. They start to self-fund, right? And try to solve the problem.
Yeah.
It's the same problem we started with, which is like finding something you're obsessed with, right? Like you're a real entrepreneur, you get really obsessed with being with that particular problem, that particular business.
Right.
How, or what advice do you give people to let go? How do you unwind yourself out of that obsession and free yourself so that you can move on? Because for some, I think it's easy, but for many, it's really hard.
Yeah.
Like let go, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, your strength is always your weakness, right? And so this idea of I'm going to figure it out no matter what, is a way of a lot of entrepreneurs think. I just think that you need to know that failure is part of the game. And not only is there a lot of failure, every day as you're sort of learning what works and doesn't from, a marketing perspective, let's say, or production or whatever it may be, on the grandest of scale, I also think that failure is a part of the game. We wouldn't take these, if it was easy and there wasn't failure, nobody would say, everyone would take the risk and it wouldn't be the way that it is. And so I just think that people that get into these types of entrepreneurial endeavors need to just know that failure is a big part of the game. And that doesn't mean give up as soon as, it gets a little hard. I think you do need to be very thorough. I mean, we were very thorough with the customer acquisition channels and trying every single one and measuring and realizing that the unit economics just frankly weren't going to work in a scalable way. And the amount of money we would have to spend to even get a shot of getting it right just didn't make sense.
How was FJ Labs about it? Were they supportive of the wind down?
They were great.
Yeah, because that matters.
Absolutely. Big time. Like picking the right partner is critical. And those guys are great guys. I'll never forget, the board meeting that we had where it was pretty clear the writing was on the wall. We just weren't getting the traction. The unit economics were bad. And we had a real just like moment of this is what we need to do. And so what's great about them is they're really experienced operators. And so although they've been wildly successful, have also, had to shut many companies down, some personally that they've been founders of, and others were just like big bets that didn't play out for whatever reason. And so they know the game, and back to this failure as part of the game, like, they respect it. And it was their capital too. So they probably had a little bit less of the LPs may not like this or that at the time. Now they've raised outside capital. So I'm sure that's a little bit of a higher bar, but generally speaking, like when the writing's on the wall, the writing's on the wall, and don't try to beat your head against the wall too much. It's actually a better use of your time as a talented as a talented professional to sort of find an idea that can work and put your time and money into that, because I only spent about a year on that business. And I'm really thankful because I've seen people spend 5, 6, 7 years, 10, even more, just banging their head against the wall on an idea that, it's pretty obvious to outside people looking in, it's probably not going to work. And you've had time to prove it out. It's still not going to work.
I don't want to belabor on this point so much because we know where this goes and you become very successful in your career. But from the moment you officially announced the shutdown, how quickly were you able to get back on your feet and start something else? Like, what was the time frame?
Yeah. So this sort of starts to get into the story of building the next business. What I did is I reached out to local insurance professionals in Boston, where I was, and I was frankly just trying to get somebody to buy the book and the technology that we had built. We had a small book of insurance business, and we had some tech that we built over that year. And so I was reaching out to some local insurance professionals and essentially saying, "Hey, would you have interest in this?" And like, this is an absolute fire sale. You know, I was calling a spade. We're shutting this down. Got this tech. It would be a shame for it to go to waste. And so I met with, I called one of the HBS professors, again, back to the network, who I had a great relationship with. And he introduced me to this local Boston insurance professional, a guy named Phil Edmondson. He's ultimately the co-founder of Corvus, the business we started. And Phil was nice enough to meet with me. He had just sold his large commercial insurance brokerage to Arthur J. Gallagher. And so he was in essentially an earn-out phase, and he was doing a lot of investing in insurtech at the time type companies. So he was meeting with a lot of founders and different people, and I didn't really know him. I knew of him, but I remember sitting in his office and telling him that I'm shutting down this business that I've been running, and was asking him if he knew anyone who might want to buy the book or tech. I knew he wouldn't be a fit for that because he was doing commercial and it's just different. And he was nice enough to introduce me to 3 different people. And these were sort of like heavy hitters in Boston. And he was able to get them on the phone, and I offered the tech and book, and no one took me up on that. But he, at the end of our conversation, so, you know, met with him for an hour, 58 minutes talking about how I'm shutting this down and how he could be helpful. In the last 2 minutes, he said, "I've been thinking about starting something. You could be an interesting person to help me build that. If that's interesting, we should talk." And he basically had said in the moment that he was talking with Bain Capital Ventures, and they were very supportive of teaming up with him to do this. So I'm obviously in shutdown mode, wind down, devastating emotional state, et cetera, but trying to find a happy home for not only the team, the book, and the tech. But I obviously thought about that going forward. So essentially, I started to really think about how to what to do next while I was shutting this business down. And I kept having conversations with Phil, and he shared more and more about his vision. And I ended up teaming up with him. So I was still technically shutting the business down. And I remember I would sort of help him with some strategic early days work, and then go like disassemble some computers and desks in the office because there was so much overlap between the two, unfortunately. But it didn't take too long to shut the previous business down before we were really just off to the races with the new one.
So you got right back on it.
Right back on it.
Nice.
And so, just for the audience, what was or is Corvus? Just for the group to know, like what was the big idea, and ultimately, you know, why then and why it?
Yeah. So the original idea, which was basically to build a commercial insurance, middle market focused insurance company. So right now, when you think about insurance and commercial insurance in particular, when the company becomes middle market, let's say it gets to, 5-10 million of revenue and above, you pretty much exclusively buy your insurance through a broker. And so Phil's big idea at the time was, I've been meeting tons and tons of entrepreneurs, but pretty much they're all building for the personal insurance market or small commercial. And that makes a lot of sense because a lot of entrepreneurs who are getting into that space and think insurance is interesting, they can just relate to that. They've never necessarily been part of the finance team buying insurance for a $100 million company. And so a lot of energy and money was being thrown at those, but not this middle market of commercial insurance with a heavy emphasis on broker distribution. So instead of trying to disintermediate and cut the brokers out, let's lean into them, make them happy, and have them distribute the product that we build. So the products that we wanted to build at the beginning was pretty much every commercial line that you can imagine, build a full multi-line commercial insurance company, but build it with a great experience. So think user experience for the brokers and the policyholders and the underwriters, but also always use some novel data set to sort of make underwriting a little better and sort of improve that loss ratio, which is ultimately how insurance companies make their money if they prove to be good at underwriting. So at the beginning, it was very multi-line focused. And then pretty soon after we started it, we really started to focus on cyber insurance, which was ultimately where we narrowed in and built the company around.
Why? What made you choose that?
So when we were evaluating the different product line ideas, we thought about property insurance and workers' comp and cyber and cargo insurance. There's so many different lines that we were looking at. We built a little rubric in how to think about which opportunities were the most interesting. And cyber really fit it all very well. It was the most elegant solution. It was a fast growing product, although it wasn't that big at the time. From a market size perspective, it was really fast growing. The loss ratios were very low at the time, so it was a very profitable product. It was a digital risk, and we were building digital tools, so it just seemed to match very well. There were a lot of wholesale brokers who sold it because it was a specialty line, and so from a distribution perspective, and again, back when I was thinking about who to work with and how to build the next business, distribution was very much on my mind, and Phil was a broker. I mean, he spent the last 30 years before that building this distribution business as a broker.
That's at one point.
And so I felt that I could help do everything else, but this guy can sell insurance. And so if we team up, we could really get it done.
And the legacy incumbents were not really focused on that, right? I mean, ultimately that, not to peak to where the story ends, but ultimately the big guys at that time, 2017-ish, right?
That's right.
We're not really focused or thinking about, cyber and these types of things. We're talking pre-COVID, we're talking, they're still looking at the world the old way.
A lot of them had a product, so they were selling cyber insurance, but it wasn't nearly as important as it is now. Like, it's very much becoming one of the core product lines that pretty much every company buys. Where at the time, the joke was, you order your meal of insurance and you get a side of cyber insurance. Like, now it's part of the core offering to a certain extent. It's not mandatory, but in many ways it is, because there's so many contractual obligations that you have just as a bigger business with partners to carry cyber insurance. So, at the time though, it was relatively small.
That moment in pivoting, you go back to when you knew to wind it down, when you knew to pivot. Why were you looking for the pivot? Was it because things weren't working out, or like what ultimately led you down that path to decide we're going to go and we're going to change the business model and we're going to go after this?
Just cyber versus the multi-line?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a pivot, more just like a narrowing.
Okay.
Because we had launched a cargo insurance product and a cyber insurance product, and had other products in the sort of roadmap and queue. But almost right off the bat, you sort of felt that product market fit moment with the cyber product. It just really was magic almost from the first month that we had it in market, where the cargo insurance product we built actually predated it by a few months, and it was just harder to get traction around. Mm-hmm. And we still kept that cargo product going for 2 or 3 years, so it didn't die fast. But it was something where it's very obvious to everyone in the company and the investors that cyber was where we needed to be, and really focus. So it didn't feel like a pivot, but more just, hey, we just need to put all of our energy and attention behind this one product line that we had.
This episode is sponsored by DS, a team of makers, marketers, and entrepreneurs that help businesses transform their brand experience and unlock growth like never before. Are you a CMO, founder, or business leader looking to level up your brand and marketing? Head over to weareds.com and let's explore what is next for your business. That's weareds.com. Visit us to learn more.
So I know you said initially that you had raised money from, or you had interest from Bain Ventures, right?
That's right.
Ultimately, is that who you took the money from? How did you fund this venture?
So Phil, my co-founder, having come off that exit, which was another thing that I really liked about partnering with him, was he did have a lot of capital to start. And so I felt, at least in the early days, we weren't going to be one of those early stage startups that's just trying to scrape things together. We would be well-funded from the beginning.
So you had cereal, not just ramen in the office.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Coffee right off the bat. And so we... So basically the business was started because Matt Harris, who's a fantastic fintech investor at Bain Capital Ventures, essentially told Phil, like, hey, I'm in. It was literally that easy of a conversation for Phil. And obviously Phil had built his career and everything over 30 years. So I don't want to make it seem like it was easy, but the vision was so clear, and Phil was such a well-positioned executive and professional in that space for that market that it really resonated with Matt. So basically they decided to co-do the seed rounds. So we raised 2 different sort of seed rounds, and both were split 50-50 between Phil and Bain Capital Ventures. So that was how we got started. And then we did pretty traditional A, B, C round after that.
Got it. Were you a big part of the funding rounds after
right.
they had done it?
Big time. Yeah.
Okay.
Very much enjoyed that process.
Yeah. What was it that you enjoyed?
Telling the story. And I think the more you tell it, the more you realize what is good and bad and how to sort of think about the next phase of the business and what to focus on, what resonates, why that resonates, why certain people drop out, trying to guess, what some of the rationale may be in these types of things. And it was something where we were always raising ahead of when we needed to. There was never a moment where if we don't get this done, bad things are going to happen. Phil also very much enjoyed that process. I think he's just a salesman at heart. And so he really just could spend every day just talking to investors all day long. So in that regard, you just learn a lot about, I think, your business, as long as you don't take things personally when you are fundraising.
It's fascinating, actually. I love that idea of learning through the fundraise, right? Because you have, all these conversations. I mean, sometimes people just have a few. I've met entrepreneurs that are like, yeah, I raised $25 million in 2 weeks. And then some people actually do it the hard way, which just takes 6 months or 9 months to do. And you talk to a lot of people, you kiss a lot of frogs. But in that process, the questions that you're asked, the reasons why people jump out, actually, it's a refining process. Not many people on this show have actually said that. We usually refer to the fundraising process as something painful. It doesn't sound like that was the case for you at all.
No. I mean, it was hard. It wasn't like we had tons of term sheets in every round and just sat back and it was easy. However, I think, like everything in entrepreneurship, you have to sort of embrace it and see the good in it. And hopefully it helps you just take a step forward.
It's hard to dance for dollars, for sure. But I do think I like the idea of using it as a way to refine your strategy, to refine your pitch, to refine your story, because it goes across different parts of your business.
The question I have is, what's the unfair advantage that people aren't finding when they do a Google or a ChatGPT search about what really is the power of a salient pitch that kind of breaks through? Because you've pitched a lot, and a lot of people talk about value prop and the market size and like the basic stuff. But what would you say as someone who's now been through this a lot, if you were instilling this in a first time founder that might be listening to the show, going out pitching, trying to get their venture raise, how would you suggest they do it?
Have a super deep understanding of your customer, and for us, our customer really was more the broker than the end policyholder. And Phil being a former broker, and a lot of the work that we had done to build our product, it was just very much deeply informed by how brokers think and what they want. And so, yeah, I can't help but think that sometimes when you're talking to an entrepreneur or founder, and you just know that they deeply know their customer and the problem, like that's an incredible unfair advantage. And in some ways, it's a lot of venture investors in particular, can't keep up with a founder like that because they have so much work to do to catch up to that level of understanding. And if they have too many opportunities on their plate, and they, sometimes it doesn't work well. You need to almost find the founder the investor that has already spent a lot of time in the space and respects the physics of it and the gravity of how the customer thinks and the way they act.
I love that. One of the things I learned recently, which I'm not Mr. Venture-backed fundraise guy, so I've learned a lot from people who have raised money like yourselves. He's the guy who usually does that in my world, but it's what I call the bar breakthrough conversation, which is if you got your end customer, your sort of perfect A customer out at a bar and got them drunk, what are the things that they would tell you that you can then put into a story, into a pitch? And the second I heard that, I was like, oh man, this is going to change the way that I think about branding and positioning and strategy. So would you say that that's a fair assessment? It's like really like get the customer drunk, help them understand like what the story is.
Yeah.
Fair?
Sure. Yeah.
Awesome. So now Corvus is going really well. You're picking up market share. You've got a unique niche going on there. And then the world changes, right? Yeah. COVID comes around. How did that initially affect you as an entrepreneur in the beginning? Because this is such a black swan event, right? Like what did it do to your business? What did it do to you as an entrepreneur? I'd imagine we're going from physical traditional offices, the classic way, into this digital thing. I want to hear more about that, because if my memory hits me from the notes that we had discussed, COVID was essentially an accelerant for your business in a big way. Is that right?
It was. Yeah. Unfortunately, obviously it was a strange time and a painful time for many. And it was painful for us too, to a certain extent. I mean, we had just closed our B round in December, and we had just signed a 90-person office, and we had probably 50 total people in the company. Maybe 30 were in the Boston area. And we were anticipating growth. So we signed a 90-person office in February. And we were supposed to move in May, and March is obviously when everything fell apart. And so we basically had to pay movers to move all of our stuff from one office to another. And it just sat, for many, many months before anybody could even go in to check on it. But for us, we obviously had to very quickly change the way that we operated. It wasn't that big of a deal because we were already had salespeople in a lot of different locations. And so we were sort of used to some of the remote tools. But ultimately what ended up happening was we essentially just kept growing. And one of the things that really sort of accelerated our growth was the fact that hacking and essentially our product became more and more useful, unfortunately, because there were so many hackers that were bored and sitting at home and started hacking. And then the other thing that happened, which I think is an underappreciated part of the story, is Bitcoin started to really increase in price. And Bitcoin is the currency for hacking. And so what ended up happening was these different hacking groups, by no skill of their own, just started, their balance sheets started to just grow and grow because the price of Bitcoin was going up. And so this unbelievably bad, unfortunately, thing happened where just like more and more hacks started to happen. And that started to then heat up cyber insurance in terms of loss ratios, which in turn, and this is how insurance works, the pricing starts going up and people start buying it more because there's more hacks. And so this thing happened where during that period for the next sort of year or two, like every single cyber insurance company was raising rates by 2-3 times. And not because they were trying to gouge anyone, it was because the claims were just getting really, really hot. And so you had to sort of, keep pace with what was happening on that side. So people were buying it for the first time. People were buying more of it than they ever had before in terms of limit, and prices were going 2-3 times in certain industries. And so it was something where we were really well positioned at the beginning of 2020 to capitalize on that. We had fresh capital in the bank. We were already used to working remotely, where a lot of other insurance companies did not have that luxury. And so we were able to essentially be in a great place.
What's the worst industry to insure for cybersecurity?
There's always a different answer to that question. But one of the things that we've seen is a lot of times the hacking community will start picking on one industry because they either have some software that they all use that has some deficiency or something that people aren't patching. And so sometimes you see waves where with certain industries, and I remember 4 or 5 years ago, title agents was like the place where if you had title agents on your book, you were getting absolutely smoked from a claims perspective. And that's changed. Like, please, I don't know if that's true today, but it's something where there is this sort of wave where people tend to pick on certain industries because they have similar characteristics. And a lot of times these hackers are looking for just low-hanging fruit. And they find it sometimes in the same industry and just lean in.
I saw a company, I don't know if they were successful or not. It was a technology startup that one of the gentlemen was out of here where it was Bitcoin related, but you got paid cryptocurrency to find vulnerabilities for insurance companies in softwares so that you could predict
where, like a bounty hunt?
It was a bounty hunter. Yeah. It was a bounty hunting business.
That's big business. Yeah.
Yeah. So you picked the software and then you paid people and you got paid per bug. And
I think Facebook pays like $1 million if you can don't quote me on that. I think it's like if you can crack one of their certain servers or something, like they'll pay you like open bounty or something like that.
My poor brother, he was like a small chiropractic office. His software got hit and they cracked him and they froze his whole business up for a day until he paid $10,000 in Bitcoin. Something ridiculous.
Yeah. Ransomware became so common, unfortunately, in these moments. And this is unfortunately a common story.
Yeah. So start to Series B was how many years? So 2020 was COVID. When did you start the company?
So we started the company January of 2017.
Okay. So you're 3 years in when COVID hits.
That's right.
And then things start to accelerate during COVID. When did you exit the business? The start of the acquisition?
So the start of the process of selling the company was sort of end of 22.
Mm-hmm.
We signed the definitive agreement in November of 23, and the deal closed January of 24.
I love to hear the process. So did you decide we're going to sell it? You hired an investment banker, or did someone approach you? How did it go?
Yeah, so we ultimately sold the business to Travelers, and in 2022, so we had done a C round in March of 21, which was the height of venture capital multiples, and just if you look at any of the charts, that was sort of when things were the hottest.
Yeah,
and then it started to come down
before the winter.
That's right. And so we were one of those lucky companies that did $115 million Series C in March of 21.
Wow.
And so we did that round, and part of that fundraise was we were going to go international. And so we spent time basically strategically thinking about the best way to do that. We ended up buying a company out of London that had a Lloyd's of London book of business, but then we also wanted to get into the EU. So, the way that Lloyd's works in that particular business was more UK and a little bit United States focused, but it wasn't really focused on the EU. And so we wanted to be an early first mover in the EU. So we were looking for capacity providers, not operating capital, but insurance capacity for helping us go to the EU. So we talked to a bunch of companies, and ultimately Travelers ended up being our partner for this EU expansion. So we did a $5 million deal, which is a very, very, very small deal for such a big company. And the diligence on their side was pretty intense. But they're an amazing brand. And so when we ended up doing that deal to get through everything that we needed to for this, small $5 million insurance capacity partnership, they learned a lot about us, from our team to our technology to how we think about everything. The fact that we're very sort of broker focused and underwriting organization that uses technology, not necessarily a technology company that just has underwriters. And so there are lots of different things that I think really resonated with them. And then from my understanding, because I've been told this, when they, as an executive team, thought about the future, they recognized the importance of cyber insurance as just sort of a core line and a really important product line to be dominant in. And so
thank you for that information. We'll buy you now.
That was sort of what happened. I think that they were like, okay, the way that we have built it and are thinking about it is the same way that they would like to build it and are thinking about it. And they were very early in their process. If you look at Travelers, generally speaking, they're like 10% market share across many lines. For cyber, they were like less than 1%, so it sort of didn't necessarily match with their style along the other lines. And so I think part of their go forward thinking was, how can we, improve that? And so I think in their mind, they were either going to build something similar to what we had done or potentially acquire. And so that process and that small partnership got them to know us really well, and they leaned in and started to give some pretty overt signals, like, hey, we would like to talk about a bigger partnership, right? And all the fun dancing between both sides. We definitely did not put the company for sale at all. They very much started that conversation, but as founders and in that part of the journey, we're talking year 6 or so, there couldn't be a better brand to buy the business that you start. I mean, they're a fantastic insurance company. They really treat their people well. And there's just so many reasons. Their balance sheet's massive. There's so many reasons to partner with someone like them. And so it was pretty obvious to us that if we could do a deal that worked for both sides, we should really seriously consider it.
So at this point, how did you start feeling? I always like to know like the internal stuff, like you're hitting it, you're young still, you've got young kids at this point, you've got, you're basically, going to the Super Bowl, you feel it coming, what was life like for you at that moment?
Confusing.
How? Say
Confusing. More. I mean, just because on the one hand, when you start having those conversations, you start to feel like, okay, well, just like, let's sell it and be done, and it just takes so much time and process, especially for the process that we went through to go through everything that's needed to actually get to firm numbers and to really sort of get to that point of confidence that a deal will happen. It wasn't like, I don't know, an investment banking led process where, okay, in 60 days we will get term sheets and then we will sell this thing in 120 or whatever. It was much more drawn out. And because of that, I use the word confusing because I didn't know if I should celebrate or buckle up for 5 more years. And so trying to manage the business and where we invested, there was always this, I'll use the word distracting and conflicting sort of tension in our heads on how to manage the business. Like, were they going to buy us? And if so, we should in some ways operate this way. And if not, we should think this way. And so there wasn't wildly different opinions on where to go, but it was definitely internally hard because I was so excited about the potential, but at the same time, knew that there was a lot that needed to happen to get it done.
That's remarkably self-aware. How do you differentiate between they're on a fact-finding mission to rob us of everything we have versus actually believe that the intent is positive? Because I've seen it go both ways for entrepreneurs. And then my second question is how would you give advice to entrepreneurs that are going through a process like that to potentially get acquired to balance focusing and growing the business while thinking about the acquisition? Because I'd imagine if the diligence process just to work with them was horrifying, that the diligence process to sell to them was probably equally as difficult.
Yeah. It was probably a lot more intense
I'd
because the EU capacity deal was very much one part of the business. Mm-hmm. And then we had to go to sort of big travelers corporate to get the ultimate deal done. On that side of things, it's so easy to say, just have the founder or CEO or whoever the person is, like try to manage that entire process sort of in the off hours. But think in order to put your company in the best light, you sort of need to get a lot of the all-stars that help build the company and operate the company to exposure to the acquirer so that they can, be confident they're buying something that's great. And so if you're able to pull something like that off as an executive team where you can just put it on a certain small number of people, that's great. We really struggled to do that because we really wanted to show the breadth of our human talent through the process. And so we just frankly had to have really open conversations with, this is going to take up a lot of time, but we think if this works, it'll be the best thing, for the business where, they're a great company to team up with and partner with. And so we just had people work a lot, and it was something where it was sort of fun. I mean, a lot of people had never gone through that experience before, myself included. So there was a rush to it all, but it was definitely difficult to try to manage. But we also had some level of scale. We were at about 250 total people. Mm-hmm. So there were enough lieutenants that you could sort of push some things down to as executives, and just, hope that it worked out. And it did.
And so the first question, how do you differentiate between they're on a fact-finding mission to rob us of all of our IP versus actually do the right thing? Because a company of that size, it's hard to block them from a category or block them from being competitors because they could build it. Yeah. They likely won't. But,
we've had guests on the show that literally were going through DD to sell their company. And then someone was like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. And then 6 months later, they did their own thing. Where very clearly it was informed by that. Yeah. So we hear that a lot. So I think in your case, was that ever a concern of yours, or did you who was?
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this. So I would say 2 things. One is we did hire an investment banker to help just sort of manage the process. Because we realized if a deal didn't happen with them, we either needed to raise more capital or we wanted to, get some more insurance capacity deals, which was sort of the two types of funding we were always looking for, or potentially it was time to sell the business. And so we did hire a banker to help us manage that process. And I think to a certain extent, they helped sort of sit in the middle to help manage, okay, at what point do we share different parts of our intellectual property? So that was helpful for sure. But back to this core question, I don't know if you can really eliminate that risk. I think it's just unfortunately a calculated risk that you just have to take
just
at a certain point.
Yeah.
And again, part of the game.
Yeah. How much dating did you do? Did you do a lot of dating? Because I feel like that. I was talking to a buddy of mine who sold a company for a lot of money, right? Significant amount of money. And he owned most of it. So he got a lion's share of it. And now he's thinking about going into business with someone because he sees a big opportunity. And I was like, how much time have you spent with him? And he's like, I don't know, maybe 40 hours, 50 hours. And I was like, is that enough? Like, is that enough dating? Because we met someone that we had on the show, Miles, who talked about how he would date executives and take them out to lunch and really test them. Like, did you do a lot of dating before you even got into the discussion? Obviously, you were doing business with them. You said the $5 million line.
Yeah, but even that business partnership was sort of a smaller part of our business.
Yeah.
In terms of the core executive team, I would say we did spend a lot of time, and it was the benefit to a certain extent of such an elongated process on the whole deal making side was that we did spend a lot of time talking over the phone and, meeting in person and these types of things. So
you feel like I know this person, they're not going to screw me over.
Yeah. I mean, you never really know. But the other thing that I think is sort of true for a lot of larger organizations is it's just hard for them to actually execute on complete builds like what we had built. They would, and I'm not saying just Travelers, any large company tends to struggle with this. And so I think the real practical risk of them taking everything that we had done and sort of reverse engineering it and building it, they're more than capable of doing it. I just think that at the end of the day, we wanted to show them that you'd just be way faster to acquire us.
Yeah. So that's your next domain, higher probability.
There we go.
Let's talk about the deal for a second. And, you don't have to just divulge any numbers if you don't want to. Was it a cash deal, a stock deal? Was it a split deal? Did you have an earn out in the deal? Like what was, and how did you decide whether or not that deal was the right deal for you guys?
So we had spent so much time with them. We had really started, I think on both sides, frankly, to understand, this would be a great partnership. Everything that we had built, the platform, the team, the digital platform, the team, with the brand of a Travelers and the balance sheet of a Travelers, it would just be absolute, supercharged business. And so we were really excited about the potential. So when the final deal terms started to come together and we were looking at where the market was, because this was a different time than March of 21, this is, mid 23 to the fall of 23. It was a good deal on both sides.
Okay.
And so we decided to move forward and did it.
Very nice. What was the moment like? We usually ask when the wire hits, right? You signed a deal and then the money comes in. Was there a moment for you like that? Were you with your wife and kids or anything like that? Or are you in business mode?
Yeah. So one of the fortunate moments of fundraising in March of 21, when things were so hot, if you will, and capital was so, to a certain extent, easy to find and willingly given out. I did take a secondary during that round, that Series C round. And so that was actually, to go back to your wire moment, the big moment for my life.
Yeah.
Just basically going from, say, month to month to being able to pay off student loans and everything right away. So that was the big life-changing moment. And then when the company sold a couple of years later, it was obviously great, but to a certain extent, I'd already sort of dealt with the debt and whatnot from that previous moment. So to a certain extent, what was the best of the final sale when we sold the company to Travelers was the story. I equated a little bit to, when you get a degree, let's say it is from a school, you put it up on the wall and no one can take it away. And in the same way, when you sell your business and there's a lot of press releases around it and you're able to share the sale price and these types of things, which we're able to do, there's a story that you become attached to that no one can take away. I can say I helped build a successful business.
Yeah, there's essentially 435 million different stories that you can talk about there, right?
Yeah, so we sold the company for $435 million, and it was something where, for the rest of my life, I can say I helped build a company and sold it for $435 million. And there's something about the story that I think in many ways is more valuable than the dollars. And so I didn't anticipate that, but I've definitely felt that over the last year or so.
I love your humility, though. I mean, I think one of the things that I've really come to appreciate in getting to know you on a personal note and kind of outside of the cameras, if you will, is, Mike's a really relaxed guy. Like, I know some people who have sold their company for $20 million or $30 million and they run around like, they're like a billionaire. And I think there's just a humbleness and a humility to you and a focus to you that I've just come to personally appreciate. So I just want to say thanks for being able to show me that side of you.
Thanks.
I would have gotten a little bit petty, like Tom Petty, and I would have sent.
Oh, like Tom Petty, I think.
I would have sent a press release to the person that put your website up that showed that it was down.
Oh. Yeah.
Just like hey.
Or you could pull a Bezos and just buy them. If they're still in business, because I'm guessing they're probably
no interest in owning that. But that
sometimes they buy it just to be an asshole. That's what Elon's about to buy MSNBC just to do that.
So we talked about the wire drop moment.
Are they still around though? That media company that wrote about you?
It is.
It is. Did they write about you this time?
Oh yeah.
So full circle, right?
Yeah.
Did you take the interview or you didn't, or you just let the press release speak for you?
Yeah, just press release.
Sorry.
No, it's all good.
Just everybody's entitled to be a little petty.
Listen, whatever gets you going, right?
Not my style, but yeah, I get it.
What was that thing you used to always say? You don't get any taller by standing on the ashes of your competitor?
Yeah, but that's a different situation. That's not a competitor. That's just a piece of shit media.
I've learned a lot of little tidbits from this guy over the years, if you can't tell, folks. So what comes next, right? So you have this windfall. Did you end up staying on as an executive? Kind of going through that period of time. Was there sort of an agreement in terms of how long you kind of stick around and that sort of thing, or no?
Yeah, I think when they were looking at me as part of the go forward plan, I frankly had done a pretty good job of hiring people that could do what needed to be done in my part of the world, in the business. And so, I was not a big part of the go forward plan. I think they wanted me to stick around. I mean, I know they wanted me to stick around, but it was more just not really to execute as part of the integration, but more, long in terms of just knowing so much about the business and being just somebody who is well connected and knew a lot of the reasons that decisions were made and frankly had a lot of trust of a lot of people. They wanted me to stick around and help. And so I stuck around for 9 months. So the deal closed early January. End of September was my last date, and that was perfect. I think it was just enough time to think through how I could be helpful, but it wasn't so long for me where or them, where it just started to become distracting.
Yeah.
So that was just a few months ago?
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Couple months free.
Okay.
What was that shift for you going from entrepreneur for such a big part of your professional life to now effectively employee, in terms of like, did the dynamics and the change culturally when that happened for those 9 months that you were in that role, or would you say it was largely unfelt?
It was largely unfelt, just because the deal that I had and the role that I had was not, hey, here's 15 things that you need to do, and we're going to rob you of the way of autonomy. I mean, I still pretty much had a similar role.
Got it.
But it was unfelt.
Just to touch on the human side a little bit. I'm curious, do people start to treat you differently? Like your employees, the people that came over, like, did you feel any difference in that way?
Not really, but we're a remote company. I think it would be different if we were going into the office, and maybe you had to defend or try to shoot. Like, how do you tell people who don't know you and who you are in the business, like how do you explain it? I didn't have to do a whole lot of that. I wasn't super involved in the integration. I think my role was more just to be around rather than try to have to build a ton of relationships within, the acquirer.
Fair.
So now what's next? I mean, we actually delayed having you on the pod a little bit because we wanted to let you finish everything you were doing, because it sounds like you had a couple of interesting ideas that were brewing, but have those things turned into something new?
Yeah. So one of the observations I had over just the last 10 years of being in insurance is, insurance is this incredible product in the sense of it's a societal good to a certain extent. If you removed it from society, I always say the velocity of commerce would just completely fall apart. People would not be bold, there's so much that I think is powered by insurance.
That's a great headline, by the way. The velocity of commerce.
Yeah. I mean, it's true, right? Imagine if insurance didn't exist. People wouldn't buy anything of real substance because there's just too much risk to do so. So it's this unbelievable thing that makes people bold. And I didn't appreciate that until I got into insurance. But since I've been in the space, I've come to realize that, people absolutely hate talking about insurance. And there's good reason for it. It's one of the only products that people buy but don't want to use. Pretty much anytime you give someone money, you're expecting to get something in return, whether it's enjoyment or entertainment or obviously something tangible. And insurance is one of the things that you give money to and you honestly hope to never use it. And that creates a lot of weird buying patterns and frankly makes people tune out. Like half the people are probably tuning out right now as we're talking about insurance. And so one of the things I realized going back to what I'm doing next is over the last 10 years, so many friends had come to me and said, hey, I just bought this thing, a car, a home, whatever it may be. How should I think about my insurance? And so I would give advice, and I have pretty strong opinions that when you start to become somebody who doesn't live month to month or a high earner, you should think about your insurance differently. And so now I'm talking home, auto, umbrella type insurance. You sort of crank up your deductibles as high as you can. Self-insure as much as possible. Don't buy insurance for small things. And there's lots of different ways that like coverage matters more and your time matters more than necessarily the money that you're spending on the insurance product. So I wanted to build an insurance agency that basically took those principles and philosophies and made it so that anybody who engaged with it really enjoyed the experience.
I love that because that was actually a point, just to jump in for a second. We nerded out a lot about, I was sharing with you the Unreasonable Hospitality book and just thinking about customer experiences, that sort of thing. We spent a lot of time. I actually wish we had some of that stuff captured. And you had sort of pitched me this service idea. It wasn't a business idea. You just said, the 4 seasons, anybody who can nail the 4 seasons of X or whatever, I forgot how you framed it. Yeah. And I was like, that's really interesting. And you're like, yeah, well, we'll talk more about that another time. And then you just kind of quickly pulled it. And I was like, okay.
Well, so one of my favorite hotels, by the way.
Yeah, mine too. Yeah. and there's good reason for it.
Going there in January. Yeah. Again. Yeah.
There's great reason for it. They absolutely, rarely miss when it comes to just having a great special experience. And
so talk about that.
And that's exactly what we're doing with this insurance agency. I always say, we're trying to build the 4 seasons of an insurance agency. And so this would be more for people who, again, are not living sort of month to month, because the proper way to, I think about your personal insurance is to have higher deductibles. And, we're building this tool called a deductible optimizer that essentially looks at when there's a law of diminishing returns and when there's like this a split between the deductibles and premiums and a lot of other types of tools. But, an annual review that's AI assisted, super responsive, text, call, live chat, email, get responses back, lightning fast, wide access to product. There's just a lot of things and moments that I think should feel more confidence when it comes to your insurance. Like one of my favorite questions to ask a lot of people and friends I meet is, how confident are you they have the right insurance? And half the people are like, I have no idea. I don't even know who my insurance, is with or from and all this. And that's opportunity for me because in this business, which is called Pineview Insurance Group, and we are trying to build confidence, in the clients that they have the right program.
Why Pineview?
Pineview, just frankly, the domain was available and it sounded a little bit like a country club. Since we're focused more on sort of high earners, high net worth, it
sounds premium. Like even just hearing Pineview, it's like, it sounds like an interesting thing. So is it fair
to hedge fund almost, right?
Yeah.
Like Greenwich-based hedge fund.
Yeah.
So is it fair to say that you're building the insurance agency of the future?
I like to think so. Yes.
So when you think about just obviously actuaries, I know are really scared because large language models and different types of language models and AI models have really, really changed a lot, right? We go back since ChatGPT and everything that's followed it, the hype cycles have changed quite a bit. Businesses are going big or going bust very much faster because of all this. How do you see the role of AI shifting the business you're building today? And will it help you or hurt you as you think about your 4 seasons, vision statement, if you will?
I think it's going to help us immensely. And I plan to lean into AI as a tool and a technology to help us. But when you get to sort of high net worth, high earner in insurance, it tends to get more complicated. People tend to own more, and there are different ways that you should think about risk management when it comes to those types of assets in your insurance. And I think AI is very good, even now today, at getting a sense of those complicated situations and either helping the human advisor that's involved ask the right questions or lean into certain areas that may need to just be discovered a little more in terms of what the risk exposure is.
I love that.
And then also help the client better understand what their actual risk appetite is. And so there's a lot of tools that we are building that, to the client, they likely have no idea that AI is involved, but it just helps you be more thorough in these complicated situations because there's just so much it can hold together where, a human advisor, especially an experienced one, which we're only hiring at Pineview, are great, but even those people have blind spots and AI can help fix and cover up those blind spots.
I couldn't agree with you more. I taught a 15-year-old the other day decision sciences in like 5 minutes because of ChatGPT. Okay. And you think about like how we make decisions as executives and entrepreneurs, way at a different level than, how most people think of decisions. Mm-hmm. But with AI now, you can sort of have these things preempt you and ask questions or whatever. So I couldn't agree with you more. You said something I want to unpack for a second, which is, I heard the term, high net worth or ultra high net worth, and there's all the buzzwords around that. But you said something I haven't heard used a lot, which is high earner.
Yeah.
And you separated high earner from high net worth. You strike me as a pretty deliberate person. Why'd you do that?
So when you use the word high net worth individual or family or whatever it may be, a lot of times people self-select out of that group because they don't think they qualify, or then it creates this question of like, well, what does that mean? And then there's not really a black and white way. I mean, if you go to Wikipedia, there are black and white ways they try to describe that. But for what we're building, it's really for people that, again, aren't living month to month. And the reason I keep using that is because if you're living month to month, you really should have low deductibles, because if you have a $10,000 expense come your way because something breaks in your house and that could break you, you need to think about your insurance and optimize more for those types of moments. But when you start to have more ability to basically self-insure and have higher deductibles, like you should absolutely lean into that. And that's why I use high earner, because it doesn't necessarily, because there are people that are a great fit for what we're building at Pineview Insurance Group, but wouldn't consider themselves high net worth. But they'll eventually get there because they're likely high earners and they'll acquire more and more. Like, we actually love a client that is currently renting and wants a decent size umbrella policy. Like, that's a great client for us because we know that over time they'll appreciate, again, the 4 seasons of insurance agency experience. And as they buy more and more, we'll be a great home for them and agent. So
right on. Let's talk about the D for a second. And when I people are like, let's talk about the D. What do you mean? Distribution.
I was just about to go there. I was like, so what's the distribution?
Because you talked about that a lot in terms of it's made or break your career in a lot of ways and the things that you've done. What's the distribution strategy for this one?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different channels that we will test. And I am starting with a handful, but there's a long roadmap that we'll eventually get to. Some of the more obvious ones to me are actually leaning into what I would call the social communities that are popping up all over the place. And we met on one of them called Hampton. And so there's a lot of these groups that are basically groups of tech entrepreneurs. Sometimes they're high finance professionals and the types of target market that are a great fit for Pineview. And they, for the most part, are looking for advice from other trusted people and leaning into some of those networks and just being sort of the insurance resource for people is part of the strategy.
So is Pineview going to be the Sam's List of insurance?
Maybe, I mean, obviously Sam's List is more about finding CPAs, but, we hope to be the insurance resource on, these different communities. And you have to be careful, right? You don't want to turn into this sort of like
sleazy
and sleazy, and it's not the reason, but there are lots of people that ask questions and don't feel confident with their current insurance, and so we want to be there to help that, not only with all the tools that we're building, but our access and responsiveness. So basically joining what I would call these like post-exited founder groups and social things is a part of the strategy. Another thing would be just leaning into the Harvard and MIT network and different worlds that I'm fortunate enough to be in from just previous experiences that I've had.
So before my insurance guy gets fired, because he's probably not going to listen to this episode, he probably should be listening to this episode, given the amount of money that I give with him, that we give.
Just thinking about how do we.
So I was going to ask the question. So question number one, when I think about me, and I think I fit into your target criteria in a lot of ways, I think about three pillars, right? Yep. The first pillar is trust. Do I trust you? The second pillar is convenience. I need convenient stuff because if it's a pain in the ass, I'm done. And the third thing is comprehension. And so when I think of those three pillars, like, do you believe that right now some of your founding principles are going to solve for those three pillars for someone like me?
Oh, 100%. So when it comes to trust, we're basically building out what I would call a knowledge base and content that if you don't know what an umbrella policy is, here's what it is and why you should think about how to right size the limits. There's so much lazy thinking that goes into insurance from my perspective, where people are just like, just buy an umbrella policy that fits your net worth, is equal to your net worth. I think that's lazy. I actually think you should tie it more to how risky your lifestyle is. Do you have a trampoline? Do you have a pool? Do you have kids? Do you sit on nonprofit boards? Those are all things that increase your risk and likelihood that you'll have an incident. And then the opposite of a lot of those things are things that decrease. And so, there's lots of different ways that I think you can build trust with a client. Benchmarking, this deductible optimizer, it's a very scientific way of thinking about deductibles. You put all of that in front of a client that, has your level of intellect, and I think you'd really appreciate it and it would build trust. When it comes to the tools and convenience, highly responsive. We're going to have a native app, so everything's right at your fingertips. Again, text, call, email, whatever, live chat, whatever you need. Like,
so you'll bend to the customer, they'll bend to you. I love that.
Exactly. You come to us how you want to reach out, and we will meet you there. And then the third category of just comprehensiveness, it goes a little bit with the trust, but basically just we want to make sure that people have an elite level of confidence that they have the right coverage for them.
I love that. Who are we speaking to, right? So what's the high earner look like? Yeah. And if someone's listening to this show and they are a high earner, where do they go to learn about Pineview?
Yeah. Again, I'll keep using this term. When you stop living month to month and you tend to, start to value your time a little more than your money. And that doesn't mean necessarily you're going to like carelessly, give your money away, but it's something where there is a switch there where, you want to make sure you have the right coverage. And then if you ever do need the insurance, it is responsive in a quick and thorough way. So, for us, a great client is, again, the person who's an urban dweller who's potentially a renter with an umbrella, but is fairly high earning. And then really core target would be anybody that has a house, maybe a couple and a few cars. And, the idea of having a $3-5+ million umbrella policy, like sort of resonates. Anyone like that, I'd love to focus on tech entrepreneurs and high finance professionals and anybody that is sort of around those regions. They tend to really appreciate the tools and experience that we built.
Where do we go online to find you?
PVIG.com.
PVIG.com.
That's right.
I would strongly suggest that you spend some considerable time in Fairfield County. Just start around Westport. You can go Fairfield if you want, but targeting might be a little wiggly there. But once you get to Westport down to Greenwich, I think you're going to find a lot of your at least the financial professionals, multiple cars, multiple houses, high earner potential, working at the hedge funds, working at the finance companies.
Yep. You down with PVIG? Yeah, you know me.
There we go.
I was going to say car collector clubs that are popping up like crazy. The people that have 2, 3, 4, 5 cars, all of that. I mean, I want to be a customer. I'm dealing with insurance stuff all the time. Especially right now and thinking about it. And to your point, it's not scientific. It's just like,
but I love that concierge.
I need this and I need an umbrella. Because everything that you've said is so true. As I go through my conversations with my insurance guy, it's like, what about an umbrella? And he's like, oh yeah, you should get one. It's like, how much? Oh, it should be this much.
Right.
And it's just, there's nothing to it. It's sort of,
it's frustrating.
It's frustrating. It's thoughtless. And now knowing what I just learned here on the podcast, I don't feel confident. One word that you said a couple times on this podcast that I really resonate with is bold. I'm a bold person.
Yeah.
I like risk taking.
Yeah.
But for the first time, I'm questioning myself and I'm going, wow, should I be bold right now or do I need Pineview? Can I be bold? I'm serious. I'm not trying to be a commercial.
No. And I would actually 180 that, because what I would say is like, I'm going to be a little bit vulnerable on this show because that's just the thing to do, I think, which is like,
you're just a vulnerable guy.
I don't know shit about insurance.
Right.
And I've worked with big insurance companies, have hired our companies. One of our first companies is an agency, Digital Surgeons. And we've done a lot of stuff in that space, ironically. But what's funny is me, as someone who's in that criteria, that high earner thing that you described, I believe that influencers are the new brokers.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a broker, but all of my insurance decisions, who I went with, why I went with it, the types of things I did, I got advice from him. And I'm saying that very openly because not just because we're business partners in a lot of different ventures and have invested in a lot of stuff, but the process was so arduous of going through Umbrella and Life and all these different things. And it was all confusing as shit. They all had terrible digital experiences in terms of
find the documents.
Can't find the documents, pain in the ass, right? So I remember when I got my first umbrella policy, it was because of you. You're like, hey, do you have an umbrella? And I was like, you mean like for the rain? He goes, no, you need an umbrella policy. I was like, what does that even mean? Yeah. So I say that again, not as a plug, but really to say like, I think that who influences these decisions and how these groups are influenced, clearly you've got a great go-to-market strategy already, so it's awesome. Yeah.
I love to say too many smart people do dumb things with their insurance, and it's unintentional, right? They just don't necessarily know or haven't met the right person. And so we're trying to build the experience, this productized high level of service experience to stop that and help smart people do smart things with their insurance.
Well, insurance is unsexy, but being unprotected is really not. So it's like,
who's your target audience? Smart dummies.
Yeah.
Pineview. Be bold.
Well, it's, right? It's so unintentional.
No, I know.
One of the most competent friends that I have is actually my wedding party. Very, very, very successful human. Doesn't have an umbrella policy because he doesn't even know what it is. And this guy does very, very well. And so it's something where like, I almost view it a little bit as like community service, trying to, because umbrella policies are relatively inexpensive for really nice coverage when you need it the most.
I think you've articulated insurance in such a way on this podcast that really was enlightening to me, because I actually have had, to his point, I've actually been pretty on top of it. We had buy-sell insurance early. We had, we've had the insurances. But the thing that I never thought about was that insurance is empowering, right? Like, and I think about it like we have lots of properties now.
De-risk.
And, you just sort of look at it and you're like, oh yeah, you have to have insurance, right? Like if you rent it to somebody, you tell them, oh, I want this minimum amount of insurance. I've never actually heard someone say this is how you should calculate what that minimum amount of insurance should be. Right. So giving people confidence and knowing that, like just this conversation alone, I wish we could just sort of truncate it and just like say, like, if you are an entrepreneur, if you're a high earner, if you're thinking about insurance, you should be thinking about it this way. And I don't think anyone's having that conversation. So it's a perfect time to have that. I think it's brilliant of you to bring that to light.
I like to say, if you're a serious person, you should reach out because there's a lot of unserious people that are just trying to save as much as they possibly can on their insurance, and it may work out for them. Insurance is this kind of a thing. It's a little bit of a gamble, but be a smart gamble. If you can afford higher deductibles, get higher deductibles.
And I hate to say it because I don't mean to offend anybody when I say it, but it's the truth. At least my truth is like, most brokers are bozos, where they think just because, they know you or you went to high school with them or whatever. I mean, I know somebody I went to high school with. He's always trying to sell me insurance. I'm like, dude, I'm not going to buy insurance from you just because I went to high school with you, dude. Yeah. You got to like, give me a reason to talk to you. So I think that the old way of proposing, connecting, and selling insurance, I think is like way past us. I think the newer model is going to Four Seasons, right? Like when Steve Jobs launched the Apple stores, people thought he was crazy, and that still has been one of the biggest contributors to their market cap. So I think you're onto something. I'm actually a little bit jealous that I just didn't see the world the way you did. It went into some of the wrong.
So I'm just curious. So let's go back to the entrepreneurship part of this for a second. Sure. Are you self-funding? Did you raise money? Like, how are you handling the business?
Self-funded.
Self-funded? Yeah, completely.
Yeah. Which is different, right? The previous business was very venture-backed, and the one before. And when I think about the life that I want to live going forward, it really has to do with like, how do you control your time?
Mm-hmm. And I'm not doing investor relations.
Right. I mean, there's a certain velocity of life and company building that happens as soon as you take that external check from a venture investor. And so I wouldn't be surprised if this company eventually would get some external investors, but I think it'd be more like guys like you and friends rather than necessarily like a hardcore venture backed type business. And so self-funded. And really, it's to sort of maintain optionality. And I do think that we'll grow a nice big business here, but it's not something where I'm impatient to have that happen. Mm-hmm. I want to do it right and make sure that the experience truly is this, Four Seasons high level experience that I have in my head and we're currently bringing to life. And so,
Solo founder this one or
solo founder.
Interesting.
So I'll just tell you this Four Seasons story. I went to Costa Rica last year. It was the first time I've been there, and we stayed at the Four Seasons. And
is that where I'm going with?
Yeah.
So we're staying in the place you already stayed at?
Yeah.
Nice. So I love when a place is vetted. It's not just a travel agent saying this
is on my wife's list, so it's got to be a good one.
I'll report back.
Sure. Yeah. So little backgrounds on Peninsula Papagayo, which is by Liberia, and it's gorgeous. Like, it's so nice there. The whales go there to have their babies. Mm-hmm. They mate there, and then they come back there. They return to have their babies. It's just pristine, beautiful.
Mm-hmm. I'm not bringing any babies.
The app.
Just so you know.
There'll be no mating. There'll be no baby making there either. For me at least, I can't speak for you. I'll never forget. I wanted a paddle board at sunrise, and because we knew that the full moon was out, so luminescence were there, so you see all the cool stuff in the water. And I go on the Four Seasons app and I asked if they could have paddle boards out, and they said that they didn't have paddle boards out until 6:30, right? And I think sunrise was like 5:48 or something. And I just wrote back, "Oh, that's so disappointing." And then the next message was, "We would hate to disappoint you, sir." Mm-hmm. And the boards will be out waiting for you on the beach. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, and literally just like that. And then you knew. And I said to my wife, I said, like, ordering a drink versus them saying, "Oh, good morning, Mr. Salinas. Here's the drink that you like." Mm-hmm. That's truly vacation. That's truly hospitality. And then they start to do things like make their own products now, and they're selling their own bed sheets and they're selling their own mattresses because they know that everything they have is so curated and special.
And now they have thousands and thousands of people, and they've never had to pay for an ad with us listening to it. We're talking about it.
Right.
All three of us are talking about it because of the principles and the experiences that they put in from day one. So that in itself is like its own marketing machine.
We had a saying years ago when we first started our company, and I turned it into it's actually on a picture frame and a poster that I have in my office, and it's experiences build relationships and relationships build brands. And that's such a key thing here. And I think to your point, the way that insurance has been sold through brokers historically has been use your relationships to sell. And I think you're taking it to what it should be, which is let's build this perfect experience. Let's build this amazing, amazing experience so that relationships and bonds are made. And then our brand is going to be built there. I think it's a brilliant move. And if you do raise money, knock on our door.
All right. You got it. You got it.
If you take it to your friends and family.
And on that, I just want to say, Mike, Lloyd, everyone, this has been a really fantastic conversation. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming down from Mass.
We'll
put everything in the show notes as always, folks. And I think it's a great place for us to wrap. And any questions we didn't ask you today that you're like, I really hope that these guys ask me that, or should we wrap it up?
No, you guys are great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Forward Obsessed. And as always, stay forward, stay obsessed.
Thank you for listening to Forward Obsessed. Please share this episode, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast app. If you'd like to contact our team, visit us at forwardobsessed.com.